The lights in the arena were off, not dimmed, not in the half-dark of a venue between events, but fully off, the specific total darkness of a large indoor space after the last crew member has left and the building has been returned to itself. The kind of dark that makes you aware of how large a room actually is, because you can hear the emptiness rather than see it. Marcus Webb had worked building services at the Las Vegas Arena for 11 years. He had cleaned the floors after boxing matches, political rallies, concerts by artists whose names he knew and artists whose names he did not. He understood the rhythms of the building when it needed to be empty and when it needed to be full. He had walked into this arena in every conceivable condition. He had never walked in and found someone already there. The figure was at center stage, standing still, not moving in the middle of a space that held 14,000 people when it was full. The stage was dark except for the single work light that crews left on for safety, a bare bulb on a tall stand, casting a small circle of yellowish light in the enormous dark. The figure stood just inside that circle, facing outward toward the empty seats. Marcus stopped walking. He recognized who it was. He backed quietly out of the corridor, pulled the door almost closed, and waited. Michael Bublé stood alone on the stage for a long moment. Then he began to sing. What Marcus Webb heard through the gap in the door that night, what he would describe years later to anyone willing to listen, was not a rehearsal in any sense he had previously understood the word. It was something more private than that and more necessary. He understood immediately that he was witnessing something not intended to be witnessed. He stayed anyway, and what he heard changed his understanding of what performing actually required from the people who did it well. The offer arrived in early 2007 in the specific form that significant professional opportunities tend to arrive for artists who have had several consecutive years of genuine commercial success, not as a question but as an assumption. The assumption being that Michael Bublé would be playing the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas for a 6-week summer residency, and that the details needed to be worked out rather than the arrangement itself needing to be decided. Michael's management received the offer with the enthusiasm the numbers justified. The arena held 16,000 people. 6 weeks at that capacity represented the kind of commercial landmark that changes the trajectory of a career, not just in revenue terms, but in what it signals to the industry about where an artist stands. Las Vegas residencies were not offered to people who had not yet proven they could sustain that level of demand. The problem, and there was a problem, was that nobody in Las Vegas had ever run a 6-week summer residency on Michael Bublé's musical territory. The Christmas records had established him as a phenomenon, but a seasonal one. Summer in Las Vegas meant a different kind of audience, a different kind of energy. Several people whose professional opinions Michael respected told him, with varying degrees of directness, that 6 weeks was ambitious. That starting smaller was better strategy than committing to a scale that might expose a gap between his audience's enthusiasm and their willingness to travel to the desert in August. Michael heard all of this. He processed it seriously. These were not unintelligent people, and their caution was based on genuine data. He sat with the concern for several days, trying to determine whether the doubt he was being asked to share was their doubt about him or his own doubt about himself wearing a more legitimate-sounding costume. He decided to do the 6 weeks. He was not certain it was the right decision. But he had learned, through years of performing for rooms that weren't ready for him, that certainty was not the prerequisite for commitment. You committed, and then you made the commitment true through the work. The problem was that deciding to do the 6 weeks and being ready to do the 6 weeks were different things, and the gap between those two states was where the trouble lived. The show that Michael and his team began building in spring 2007 was the most ambitious production of his career to that point. Not in terms of spectacle. Michael had always been suspicious of staging that substituted visual scale for musical substance, but in terms of the sustained demands it would place on every component of the performance over 6 weeks of consecutive shows. His musical director, Alan Chang, was involved from the beginning. They had worked together long enough that Alan understood what Michael was building toward without always needing it explained. A show that felt intimate even at arena scale, that maintained the quality of genuine connection across the distance between a performer on a stage and a seated audience of 16,000. Most performers at that scale used the scale itself as part of the experience. Michael's instinct had always been the opposite, to make the personal sufficiently present that the scale became irrelevant. The arrangements were built around this principle. The band was large enough to fill the room acoustically without the overamplification that turned live music into something to be endured rather than felt. The setlist was structured to move through emotional registers with the deliberateness of a narrative. The staging gave Michael room to move, to engage with different sections of the audience, to be physically present rather than planted at a single microphone. It was, in concept, exactly what it needed to be. The problem was that concept and execution were different things, and the gap between them revealed itself during rehearsals with a consistency that nobody involved was prepared for. The first full production rehearsal in Las Vegas, 3 weeks before opening night, was not a disaster in the catastrophic sense. Nothing broke. The technical elements functioned within acceptable parameters for a first full run, but something was missing, and everyone in the room knew it, and nobody said it directly, which made it worse. Michael knew it most acutely because he was the one standing on the stage, and the stage told him things in real time that no external assessment could capture. It told him that he was performing at the arena rather than inside it. That the quality of presence he could sustain in smaller venues was not making the translation to this scale. He was giving the performance, but he was not yet giving what the performance was supposed to contain. The Wednesday rehearsal was better in its technical execution and worse in its essential quality. The band was tighter, the staging was more polished, and the gap between what was happening and what was supposed to be happening was more visible because it was no longer obscured by the roughness of a first run. After the Wednesday rehearsal, Michael's tour manager laid out the numbers, the production costs, the contractual timeline. Opening night was 3 weeks away. The trajectory of standard rehearsal improvement would bring the production to a level that was professionally acceptable and commercially viable. "That's not what I'm building," Michael said. "I know," his tour manager said. "I'm not telling you to change what you're building. I'm telling you where we are." Michael nodded. He went back to his hotel room and sat there for a long time with a problem that more rehearsal alone was not going to solve. On the Friday evening of that week, Alan Chang received a text message from Michael at 11:45 at night. "Going to the arena, don't come." Alan looked at the text for a moment. He typed back, "Okay. Then, you all right?" The reply came immediately, "Yeah, just need the room." What Michael needed the room for was something he had not done since the early years of his career, before success had brought with it the permanent presence of other people, managers, musical directors, production staff, the entire infrastructure of a touring operation that surrounded every professional decision with professional opinions. What he needed was to be alone with the problem. He arrived at the arena at approximately midnight through a service entrance, found the switch for the work light, and stood in its circle of yellowish light in the enormous empty dark. He looked out at the empty seats. He tried to understand what was missing, not in the production, not in any of the specific technical elements that rehearsals had been addressing, in him. What was missing in him that was making the show something less than it was supposed to be. He thought about the early years, about the wedding receptions and corporate events and small clubs where the audience had not come to see him, where he had learned to reach toward people rather than wait for them to reach toward him, where the absence of natural advantage had required him to earn the room's attention through the quality of what he brought to it. He had been standing on the stage in rehearsals with the full weight of expectation working in his favor, and he had been performing to that expectation rather than through it. He had been giving the audience what they had come to receive, which was professionally competent and emotionally insufficient. He began to sing, not for any audience, not for the production, for the same reason he had always sung, before any of the machinery of professional music existed around him. Because the songs were true, and he needed to confirm that they were still true, and the only way to confirm that was to sing them in a room where nothing was working in his favor except the songs themselves. Marcus Webb had been about to begin his post-event walkthrough when he heard the sound through the corridor door, a voice, in a building that was supposed to be empty. His first assumption was technical, a recording playing through speakers someone had forgotten to silence. He pushed the corridor door open, and what he saw stopped him immediately. The figure at center stage was not a recording. It was a man standing in the work light, singing without amplification into the empty arena. No microphone, no speakers, nothing. Between the sound and the air of the room, just a voice filling the space by the simple physical fact of being present in it. Marcus recognized Michael Bublé from the production schedules posted in the building management offices. He recognized the voice from the radio, from the recordings his wife played in their kitchen. He pulled the door almost closed and stood in the corridor and listened through the gap. What he was hearing was not a polished performance. It was not the show that thousands of people would eventually pay to see. It was something more preliminary and more revealing, a man finding his way back to something he had temporarily lost contact with, working through material not as presentation but as reacquaintance, singing as if the songs were things he needed to understand again rather than things he needed to deliver. At one point, Michael stopped in the middle of a song. Marcus heard the silence. Then he heard Michael's voice, speaking rather than singing, addressing the empty seats as if they were occupied. "Okay, start again." And then the song began again from the beginning, differently. Marcus had spent 11 years in this building listening to sound checks and rehearsals and full performances by artists at every level of professional accomplishment. He knew the difference between a performer executing material and a performer actually inside it. What was happening on that stage at midnight was the second thing. He stayed for 45 minutes. He did not intend to stay that long. He told himself several times that he was about to leave. He did not leave. When he finally walked quietly back through the service corridor, he understood something about what the upcoming shows were going to be, not because he had seen a great performer at work in a conventional sense, but because he had seen what a great performer did when nobody was watching. Alan Chang noticed the difference on Saturday morning's rehearsal before Michael said anything. The band noticed it. The production team noticed it in the way that production teams notice things that cannot be technically accounted for, a quality of the air in the room when the performer walks out, a quality of attention that the staging suddenly seemed to deserve rather than merely accommodate. What Michael had understood, standing alone in that work light, was that the scale of the production had been operating as a substitute for the thing it was supposed to contain. He had been hiding, professionally, inside the show. And the show was not big enough to hide inside because the audiences coming to see it were not coming to see the show. They were coming to see him, and he had to be worth seeing. The Saturday rehearsal ran 3 hours. It was the best rehearsal the production had produced, and it was not close. The band played with a different quality of attention, more invested, as if they had been given permission to play what the music actually required. Alan made adjustments he had been considering for weeks. The staging, unchanged technically, felt different because the person moving through it was different, more present, more specifically occupying the space. After the rehearsal, the tour manager found Michael backstage. "What happened?" he asked. "I remembered what it was for," Michael said. The opening night of the Las Vegas residency was a Tuesday in mid-July 2007. 16,000 people filled the MGM Grand Garden Arena with the energy of an audience that has traveled specifically to be there. Not the casual audience of a local show, but the committed audience of people who have planned and anticipated and arrived with the full intention of receiving something they came a long way to receive. Michael walked on stage with the specific ease that had been absent from the rehearsals for the first 2 weeks and present in every rehearsal since Friday night. The ease that was not confidence in the shallower sense, but the ease of someone genuinely glad to be in the room and genuinely present to the specific quality of this room on this evening with these people. He began with a song that was not the planned opener. He had changed the first song that morning, the tour manager's resigned acceptance and Alan's immediate understanding. The song he chose was quieter, less obviously designed to announce the scale of the production. It was the right choice. It established in the first 3 minutes of a 6-week run that the show was not about its own scale. It was about something that the scale was in service of. Between the 4th and 5th songs, Michael stopped and spoke to the audience in a way that was not in any version of the show's script. He talked about Las Vegas as a place that existed to contain spectacle and about his specific intention to offer something that was not spectacle in that sense. He was self-deprecating about it, making the audience laugh at the idea of someone bringing big band swing standards to Las Vegas in July. But underneath the self-deprecation was a genuine statement of purpose, and the audience heard it. He sang for 2 hours and 12 minutes. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes, which is a long time for 16,000 people to sustain a response. Long enough that anyone paying attention understood they were not witnessing the reflexive enthusiasm of expectations being met, but something more specific, the recognition of something that had been genuinely worth attending. Marcus Webb attended the opening night performance. The ticket prices for a Michael Bublé Las Vegas residency were not within the budget of someone on a building services salary. He had gone to the box office the morning after Friday night and purchased 2 tickets anyway. He did not tell his wife why, only that he thought they should go. They sat in the upper level, which turned out to be precisely the right vantage point to see what Marcus had been expecting to see. The full distance between what he had witnessed at midnight in an empty arena and what that private act of reacquaintance had become when it was given 16,000 people to reach toward. His wife cried at the 5th song. She was not a person who cried at concerts. She had attended several over the years and had always remained composed while people around her were not. She cried at the 5th song, and Marcus handed her a tissue and looked at the stage. On the drive home, his wife said, "That man really means it, doesn't he?" "Yes," Marcus said, "he does." He did not tell her how he knew. Some things were witnessed privately and remained private. But he knew how he knew, and the knowing had been worth staying on a Friday night in an empty arena when he probably should have been somewhere else. The Las Vegas residency ran its full 6 weeks. Every show sold out. The reviews used language that reviewers reach for when something exceeds their prepared framework of assessment: intimate, genuine, unexpectedly moving. The vocabulary of people trying to name a quality they recognize but cannot account for technically. Michael Bublé returned to Las Vegas the following summer, and the summer after that. The residency became a feature of his touring life rather than an experiment, and the audiences that filled the arena over the years were as devoted and as varied as any he had encountered anywhere. Proof that the industry's caution about summer Las Vegas audiences and music from another era had been based on incomplete information about what audiences actually needed. What the residency proved was not primarily a commercial proposition. It proved something more personal and more durable, that the connection Michael Bublé made with audiences was not dependent on favorable conditions. It was something he could generate from within, without seasonal timing, without demographic alignment, without the safety net of performing for people who had come already knowing they would enjoy it. He had learned this first from years of performing in rooms that were not listening. He had relearned it on a Friday night in an empty arena in Las Vegas, standing in a work light with no amplification and no audience and nothing between him and the question of whether what he was doing was actually worth doing. The answer he found, the answer Marcus Webb heard through the gap in a corridor door and recognized as something real, was yes. Unambiguously, unconditionally, without the support of favorable circumstances or professional machinery. Yes. That yes had been in every performance since. It was in the performances before, in the years of wedding receptions, and empty clubs and rooms that were not listening. It was in the voice his grandfather's record player had helped form. It was in everything he had carried through the years of professional uncertainty and arrived at the other side of still holding. What Marcus heard on that Friday night was not a performer practicing. It was a performer remembering. And remembering, it turned out, was the thing that made every subsequent performance worth attending. Because an artist who knows why they are doing what they are doing, who has stood alone in an empty room and confirmed it, gives audiences something that no amount of production value can manufacture. He gives them the truth of it. That is what Marcus Webb heard through a corridor door at midnight. And that is what 16,000 people heard the following Tuesday, dressed up in all the professional machinery that made it possible for that many people to hear it at once. The truth of it was the same. Marcus had simply heard it first.